I woke up to the sound of a car horn blaring in my driveway, a driveway that, for the record, I bought, paid for, and had the survey papers to prove belonged solely to me. But when I peered through the blinds, there she was. Karen from the HOA, arms crossed like a gladiator, standing next to her shiny Lexus parked squarely across my concrete. She waved at me like she was greeting a tenant, not a neighbor, and shouted, "You'll need to move your truck off my property before the landscapers come this afternoon." Her property. I almost laughed, but the absurdity hit me too hard. It wasn't a joke. She actually believed it. I walked outside still in my robe, coffee mug in hand, and asked the most obvious question. "Karen, why is your car in my driveway?" She smiled like a queen granting mercy to a peasant. "Correction, my driveway. We've decided the boundary lines were incorrectly measured years ago. As HOA president, I'm exercising my right to reclaim it. Consider this your notice." She actually had the nerve to slap a folded letter against my chest, an official-looking paper with the HOA letterhead. The audacity was impressive, I'll give her that. I took a sip of my coffee before answering. "Karen, unless you've got the County Land Records Department in your back pocket, I'd suggest moving your Lexus before I call a tow truck." That was when she smirked and said something that changed the game. "Oh, go ahead. I've already spoken with Officer Daniels. He knows about the boundary dispute. The police won't intervene until it's settled. Which means, legally, I can use what's rightfully mine." It was a performance. Her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear, her posture meant to broadcast dominance. And sure enough, a couple across the street paused their morning jog to watch. She wasn't just trying to take my driveway. She was trying to humiliate me into surrendering it. The easy thing would have been to blow up, scream, threaten. But Karen thrived on drama. I decided right then I wasn't going to give her the show she wanted. I'd play this my way, quiet, patient, and deadly precise. So I folded the letter, tucked it into my robe pocket, and said, "Perfect. I'll keep this as evidence when the county surveyor comes out. Should make for an interesting conversation." Her smirk faltered, just a fraction, but she recovered quickly. "Don't get your hopes up. The HOA has deeper pockets than you." And with that, she turned, heels clacking, leaving her Lexus like a territorial flag planted in the middle of my life. By lunchtime, 3 more HOA board members had stopped by to inspect the property line. They circled like vultures, peering over measuring tapes, scribbling notes, pretending they had jurisdiction. One of them, a balding man with a clipboard, actually said, "It's just easier if you sign over usage rights to avoid a prolonged dispute." That was when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was coordinated. I called the county clerk that afternoon and scheduled an official survey. The soonest they could send someone out was 2 weeks. 2 weeks with Karen's Lexus squatting in my driveway like a smug middle finger. But here's the thing about people like Karen. The louder they declare victory, the more blind they become to the setup. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she stood in her yard sipping white wine, chatting loudly on her phone about how some people don't understand property lines. I raised my beer to her from my porch and smiled, calm as a man sitting on a winning lottery ticket, because she had no idea what was coming once the county surveyor arrived. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be just a fight over concrete. This was going to be a war over pride, reputation, and control. And I was going to win it on my terms. The Lexus was still there the next morning, baking in the sun like some chrome-plated monument to Karen's delusion. I half expected she'd move it overnight, realizing how ridiculous the situation was, but no. If anything, she doubled down. A bright orange cone with the HOA logo had been placed neatly at the edge of my driveway, as though she was reserving parking at a football game. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a statement, an invasion wrapped in arrogance and plastic cone authority. I stood on my porch sipping coffee and watched her water her roses with military precision. She didn't look at me, but the corner of her mouth curled up in a smile every time she adjusted the nozzle. She wanted me to see she was comfortable. She wanted me to feel boxed in. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. A couple of the older residents stopped me while I was wheeling my trash bin out. "You know, maybe you should just let Karen have a little space," one suggested cautiously, eyes darting toward her house. "She's been here a long time. Keeps things orderly." Orderly. That word stuck in my throat like a bone. Orderly for them meant keeping Karen happy, because Karen had mastered the art of intimidation disguised as community spirit. She knew everyone's business. She held the HOA fines like a cudgel. She controlled which fences were too tall, which holiday lights overstayed their welcome, which lawns needed reseeding. People didn't comply because they believed in her authority. They complied because it was easier than fighting her. I nodded politely and rolled the bin back up my driveway. Well, as far up as I could before Karen's Lexus blocked the path. The humiliation of having to angle it sideways just to get past my own property line burned in my chest. But I didn't snap. Not yet. That night, I began documenting everything. Photos of her car, time-stamped. The cone with the HOA logo. The letter she shoved into my hands. I even filmed myself trying to back into my driveway, having to stop because her bumper was in the way. Evidence wasn't just ammunition, it was insurance. 3 days into her occupation, things escalated. I came home from work to find a freshly printed HOA notice of non-compliance taped to my front door. Apparently, my truck parked halfway on the street because of her Lexus was a safety hazard. The fine listed at the bottom was $250. That was her play. Not just stealing the driveway but bleeding me through fines until I bent the knee. I laughed out loud on my porch, the sound echoing down the cul-de-sac. Karen's blinds twitched. She was watching, waiting for my reaction. I gave her a little salute with the paper and went inside. The next day, I decided to test her patience. I parked my truck directly behind her Lexus, boxing it in. Not illegally, mind you, I was still technically within the limits of the street. But if she wanted to move her car, she'd have to knock on my door. It took all of 20 minutes before she stormed over, heels clicking, perfume trailing like a weaponized cloud. She jabbed a finger toward my chest. "You can't block me in like this. That's harassment." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and let her rant. She waved her phone like a sword, threatening to call the police. "By all means," I said calmly. "Let's invite them into this conversation. I'd love a mediator." That stopped her cold. She didn't want the police yet, not without solid footing. This was a game of intimidation, and cops complicated things. She hissed something about talking to the board, and stomped back to her Lexus, but the damage was done. She knew I wasn't going to be easy prey. 2 days later, the board made their next move. A letter arrived, certified, no less, declaring that my property line was under review, and that until the matter was resolved, the HOA was exercising control over the disputed area. They even cited some obscure bylaw about community land use, which, I discovered after a quick Google search, only applied to shared recreational spaces like parks and pools, not driveways. It was laughable, but they were serious. Karen wasn't just freelancing. She had the board in her pocket. That weekend, things came to a boiling point. I woke up to flashing lights outside my window. 2 squad cars sat at the curb, officers standing with Karen and 2 board members. She was animated, waving her arms, pointing at my truck, my house, my very existence. I stepped outside slowly, hands visible, because nothing sets the tone worse than looking defensive when the cops arrive. One of the officers, a tall man with a tired face, approached. "Morning, sir. We've got a report of a property dispute." I gestured to the Lexus squatting in my driveway. "Morning, officer. You're standing on the dispute." Karen jumped in before he could answer. "This man is illegally blocking access to my driveway. He's been harassing me for days. The HOA has already recognized the boundary issue." The officer raised an eyebrow at me. "Do you have any paperwork for your property lines?" As a matter of fact, I said, and ducked inside. I returned with the deed to the house and the original survey papers from the county. According to these, the driveway is mine. Not the HOA's, not hers. And I've already scheduled a new county survey to confirm. The officer flipped through the documents while Karen's face turned blotchy red. Those are outdated, she screeched. The HOA has jurisdiction. The officer sighed. Ma'am, the HOA can't overrule county property lines. Until there's a new survey, we can't enforce anything here. It's a civil matter. That was the first crack in her armor. She sputtered, tried to argue, but the officers were already retreating to their cars. Civil matter meant, not our problem. As they drove off, Karen turned on me with pure venom. You think this is over? You're going to regret embarrassing me in front of the police. I simply smiled. Karen, I don't need to embarrass you. You're doing a great job of that yourself. She stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That night, I got a message from my next-door neighbor, a quiet guy who usually kept to himself. He slipped a note under my door that read, "Keep fighting. A lot of us are tired of her. If you need witness statements, you'll have them." For the first time in days, I felt the tide shift. Karen might have the board, but the neighbors were starting to peel away from her shadow. She was loud, she was ruthless, but she was also careless. And nothing makes people turn faster than realizing the bully can bleed. The county surveyor couldn't come soon enough. Because when that day arrived, Karen's entire empire was going to collapse in front of the very people she'd spent years terrorizing. And I was going to be there, front row, coffee in hand. The day the county surveyor was scheduled to arrive felt like Christmas morning for me and doomsday for Karen. I woke up early, brewed the strongest pot of coffee I owned, and set up a lawn chair at the edge of my driveway like it was front row seating at a gladiator match. Karen's Lexus still sat in the middle of my concrete, smug and unyielding. She had added a second cone next to it now, as though doubling the props doubled the legitimacy. The neighborhood was buzzing before the survey truck even pulled up. People came out under the guise of mowing lawns or sweeping porches, but I knew better. Everyone wanted to see the showdown. Even the joggers slowed their pace, earbuds dangling, pretending to stretch just so they could eavesdrop. Karen herself emerged in a white pantsuit, clipboard in hand, hair sprayed to the heavens. She had transformed from suburban busybody into courtroom prosecutor, ready to argue her case. At 10 a.m. sharp, the county truck rolled into view. Out stepped a man in a neon vest, carrying a tripod and a measuring wheel. He looked about as interested in drama as a rock, which made me like him instantly. This was a man who valued tape measures over tantrums. Karen pounced first, striding across the lawn before the surveyor had even closed his door. "Good morning. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association, and we've been dealing with a major encroachment issue here. The homeowner has been illegally occupying common property, and we're exercising our right to reclaim it. You'll find the lines don't match his so-called deed." The surveyor blinked slowly, like he'd heard this 1,000 times. "Ma'am, I'll need to see the recorded plat map and the deed of trust from the county clerk's office. Do you have those?" Karen faltered, then thrust her clipboard forward. It was filled with HOA bylaws, printed emails, and highlighted passages from their covenant agreement. Not a single county record in sight. "I see," the surveyor said flatly. "Well, those aren't legal boundary documents. I'll be referencing the official county plat map on record. Everything else is irrelevant." The neighbors exchanged glances. Karen's face tightened, but she recovered quickly. "Fine, fine. Just measure it out. You'll see." I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee like a spectator at a tennis mat. The surveyor set up his tripod, adjusted his instruments, and began marking points along the curb. Karen hovered behind him, narrating every move as though her commentary would bend the tape measure to her will. When he reached the end of my driveway and drove a metal stake into the ground, Karen actually clapped her hand. "There. You see? It's obvious. This portion belongs to the association. He's been parking here illegally for years. The surveyor squinted at his tablet, cross-referencing the GPS coordinates with the county plat. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, he said the words I'd been waiting for. "No, ma'am. This entire driveway falls within Mr. Thompson's parcel. Every inch of it." The collective gasp from the neighbors was almost theatrical. One of the joggers actually chuckled. Karen froze, her mouth half open, color draining from her face. She looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under her very soul. "That can't be right," she stammered. "Run it again." The surveyor adjusted his tripod, ran the measurements again, and pointed to the stake. Same result. "The property line starts here, ends there. The HOA has no claim." I leaned back in my chair, lifted my coffee mug, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, would you look at that? Concrete doesn't lie." The neighbors laughed, some openly, some behind cupped hands. Karen's composure cracked further. She tried to argue that the plat maps were outdated, that the county records hadn't been updated to reflect modern adjustments, but the surveyor shut her down with the same blunt phrase, "Ma'am, the county plat is the final authority." It should have ended there. By all logic, Karen should have slunk back to her house, tail between her legs. But Karen wasn't built to accept defeat quietly. She pivoted, and for the first time, I saw real desperation in her eyes. "This is harassment," she shouted, pointing at me. "He's been manipulating everyone, turning the neighborhood against me. He forged those papers, I guarantee it. And if the county is complicit, we'll take this higher. I'll call the state board. I'll file suit." The crowd murmured. A lawsuit? Against the county? Against me? Even for Karen, this was a reach. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. One of the board members, the balding man with the clipboard who had inspected my driveway earlier, stepped forward. "Karen, enough. We can't keep backing this. The surveyor's word is final." Karen spun on him like a viper. "You spineless coward. You were the one who told me the boundary lines were wrong. You promised me the board would support me." The man shifted uncomfortably. "We thought you had proof. We didn't sign up for this circus." Another board member, a woman in a blue sundress, chimed in. "Frankly, Karen, this whole thing has embarrassed the HOA. People are threatening to resign. We're done." The betrayal was surgical. In front of the entire neighborhood, the very board Karen had weaponized against me was pulling the rug out from under her. The surveyor quietly packed up his gear, clearly eager to escape the drama, but the damage had been done. Karen's empire was crumbling in real time. I stood, folding my lawn chair, and walked up to her. I kept my voice calm, almost gentle. "Karen, you could have just asked to borrow a cup of sugar like a normal neighbor. Instead, you tried to steal a driveway. And now you've lost more than that." Her eyes burned with hatred, but behind it, I saw something else, fear. Not of me, but of the power she was losing. The HOA presidency, the control, the image she'd curated of being untouchable, it was slipping away. And she knew it. She stormed back to her Lexus, yanked the cones out of the ground, and peeled out of my driveway so hard the tires screeched. The neighbors burst into applause, a sound I never thought I'd hear on my quiet street. But even as I basked in the victory, I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't retreat quietly. They regroup, they plot, they wait for a chance to strike again. And sure enough, that night, a letter slid under my door. No return address, just a single typed sentence. "This isn't over." The letter she slid under my door that night wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. The next morning, I found my mailbox stuffed with anonymous flyers accusing me of forgery, illegal construction, and, my personal favorite, harboring unregistered tenants. The formatting was pure Karen, bold fonts, excessive capitalization, bullet points that screamed in manic precision. It was the kind of propaganda you'd expect from a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist with access to Microsoft Word. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how fast she mobilized. Within hours, the HOA listserv was buzzing with long-winded emails from Karen, spinning the survey results as inconclusive and insisting she had filed a formal legal review. She even cited some phantom state residential property act that didn't exist outside her imagination. At first, I laughed, but then the fines started again. A notice for failure to maintain lawn edging, another for unsightly vehicle placement, and one particularly creative fine for visible trash receptacle, even though mine was tucked neatly at the side of the house, exactly where the HOA handbook said it should be. This wasn't about the driveway anymore. This was scorched earth. Karen had lost her authority in the daylight, so now she was trying to reclaim it in the shadows, death by 1,000 paper cuts. I could have fought every fine, appealed them, dragged the process out. But that was her game. She thrived on bureaucracy, on wearing people down until surrender felt cheaper than resistance. I needed something cleaner, sharper. So I documented. Again. Every flyer, every fine, every email. I even started recording conversations, discreetly clipping my phone to my pocket whenever Karen cornered me in the cul-de-sac. And she always cornered me. One evening, as I was unloading groceries, she marched over with her ever-present clipboard. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, low enough that the neighbors couldn't hear. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. But I have connections. I will bury you in paperwork until you choke." I let her rant for a full minute, nodding sympathetically as though she were confessing instead of threatening. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket, screen glowing. "Thanks, Karen. This'll make great evidence." The look on her face was worth every second of suffering. But she didn't stop. The next escalation came in the form of gossip, a poison she knew how to wield better than any document. Suddenly, I was the villain of the neighborhood. Whispers that I was abusive to service workers, that I lied about my finances to get a mortgage, that I was planning to rent out my house to college kids who'd throw parties. It was laughable, but gossip doesn't need truth. It needs repetition. And Karen was relentless. I felt the shift in the air. Some neighbors who had clapped during my victory now avoided eye contact. Others mumbled excuses when I waved. The tide she'd lost in public, she was trying to reclaim in private, drop by poisonous drop. And then came the legal filing. A thick envelope arrived one Friday afternoon. Karen had filed for a temporary injunction, claiming the property line was under dispute and demanding I cease exclusive use of the driveway until the matter was resolved in court. She'd even managed to attach affidavits from 2 board members, though notably, not the ones who had abandoned her publicly. It was absurd. The county survey was definitive, but the paperwork meant I'd have to show up in court, hire an attorney, and waste time and money defending what was already mine. I admit, that night I cracked. Sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by flyers and fines and now legal documents, I felt the first real wave of exhaustion. Karen wasn't trying to win anymore, she was trying to drain me, to break me through attrition. And it was working. But then the phone rang. It was my neighbor, the quiet guy who had slipped the supportive note under my door weeks ago. His voice was steady but urgent. "You need to know something. Karen's been holding secret meetings with the board. She's trying to rewrite the HOA bylaws to give herself authority over disputes like yours. She wants retroactive power. And she's pushing it through fast." That snapped me back. This wasn't just about me anymore. If she pulled that off, she wouldn't just ruin my life. She'd have carte blanche over the entire neighborhood. Every fence, every mailbox, every kid's bicycle left on the lawn would be another weapon in her arsenal. The next HOA meeting was 3 days away. And I decided I wasn't just going to show up. I was going to end her reign. I spent those 3 days assembling my arsenal. The flyers, the fines, the bogus emails, the recordings of her threat. I even printed the county survey results in poster size, laminated them like a courtroom exhibit. If she wanted a war of paperwork, I'd give her one, but on my terms. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Karen stood at the front, radiating smug confidence in her blazer and pearls, as though the county survey had never happened. Her voice rang out like a preacher as she presented her new bylaw amendment, framing it as necessary to preserve order and prevent abuse of community resources. Then she called for a vote. That was my cue. I stood slowly, carrying my stack of evidence, and walked to the front. The room quieted. Karen froze, eyes narrowing. "Before anyone votes," I said, "you should probably know what your president has been up to." I laid out the flyers on the table, the fines, the emails. I played the recording of her threatening to bury me in paperwork. Gasps rippled through the room. Even those who had drifted back into her orbit recoiled at the venom in her voice. Then I unveiled the county survey map, big enough for the back row to see. "This is the law. This is the property line. And this," I pointed at Karen, "is the person who tried to convince you otherwise." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen tried to recover, sputtering about out-of-context recordings and biased interpretations, but the crowd wasn't buying it. The spell was broken. The murmurs grew louder, angrier. One man shouted, "You've been lying to us." Another added, "We're sick of your games, Karen." The board members, sensing the wind shift, moved quickly. One of them stood and announced, "We need a vote of no confidence in the president." Karen's face drained of color. She tried to protest, but the momentum was unstoppable. Hands shot up across the room. One after another, neighbors who had cowered under her rule were standing tall, reclaiming their voice. The final tally wasn't even close. Karen was ousted. Removed as president, stripped of her power, her clipboard suddenly meaningless. She stood there, trembling with rage, and spat her last words before storming out. "You'll regret this. All of you. I'll find another way." The door slammed. The echo lingered. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt lighter. People clapped me on the back, shook my hand, thanked me for standing up. The battle felt won. But as I walked home under the streetlights, I couldn't shake her words. Karen wasn't the type to disappear quietly. And the truly dangerous people aren't the ones who fight you in the open. They're the ones who plot in the dark. When Karen was voted out of the HOA presidency, I thought the war was over. For a brief, glorious week, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer, like someone had lifted a heavy fog off our cul-de-sac. Neighbors who had once avoided me now waved when they walked their dogs. The joggers stopped to chat instead of sprinting by with their heads down. Even the mailman seemed to linger longer, relieved he no longer had to deal with Karen's constant complaints about improper package placement. But people like Karen don't fade quietly. They don't lick their wounds and move on. They reload. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. I opened my blinds to find my driveway egged, yolks dripping down the concrete like yellow graffiti. My truck had been keyed too, long, angry scratches running the length of the driver's side door. It was textbook Karen, but of course, she was too cunning to do it herself. I checked the cameras I had installed during the heat of the conflict. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Two teenagers, hoodies up, faces half hidden, running off after their mission. I didn't recognize them, but I didn't need to. Karen had teenagers in her orbit. Kids of her friends, kids she bribed with snacks and promises of pool access. She'd found a way to keep her hands clean while still striking back. I filed a police report, handed over the footage, and waited. I knew Karen well enough to know she wouldn't stop here. Sure enough, the next escalation was nuclear. 3 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door holding a thick envelope. "Mr. Thompson? You've been served." Inside were papers for a civil lawsuit. Harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Karen had filed against me personally, demanding damages in the thousands. The cherry on top? She'd attached a rambling 20-page affidavit detailing every supposed slight I'd committed, from menacingly glaring at her during gardening to illegally blocking her vehicle to inciting the community to violence against her. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the packet. She thinks glaring is harassment now? I asked the deputy. He didn't even crack a smile. This'll go to court, he said flatly. Better lawyer up. For the first time, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. This wasn't just flyers and fines anymore. This was the legal system, a system Karen was weaponizing with every ounce of energy she had left. I called my attorney, a calm bulldog of a man named Reynolds who had seen enough HOA disputes to last a lifetime. After skimming the papers, he leaned back in his chair and chuckled. It's garbage. But garbage still takes time to throw out. We'll fight it. The court date was set for a month later. Word spread fast through the neighborhood. Some people rolled their eyes, already sick of Karen's theatric. Others worried she might somehow win. A lawsuit wasn't just noise, it was dangerous. Karen, of course, played it up like she was Joan of Arc. She held court on her front lawn, telling anyone who would listen how she was the victim of a cruel conspiracy, how I had turned the entire street against her, how she was fighting not just for herself but for the integrity of the neighborhood. It might have worked, if not for the fact that she'd burned too many bridges. The people she needed most had already seen behind the curtain. When the day of the hearing arrived, the courtroom was packed. I'd brought Reynolds, my stack of evidence, and my calmest demeanor. Karen swept in wearing a dramatic black dress, pearl necklace gleaming, carrying a binder so thick it could have doubled as a weapon. She had no lawyer, she was representing herself, a move that was equal parts arrogance and desperation. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp glasses, called us to order. Karen launched into her tirade immediately, waving papers, calling me a liar, accusing me of slander. She played recordings of HOA meetings where I had calmly read out evidence, claiming my tone was intimidating. She even introduced photographs of her Lexus parked in my driveway, arguing it proved long-standing shared use. The judge listened patiently, jotting notes, face unreadable. Then it was Reynolds' turn. He dismantled her case piece by piece. He presented the county survey, the video of her threats, the flyers she'd printed, the bogus fines. He even played the recording of her telling me she would bury me in paperwork until I choked. The courtroom chuckled. The judge raised an eyebrow. When Reynolds finished, there was silence. Karen's face was crimson, her hands shaking as she shuffled her papers. She tried one last time, crying out that she had been humiliated and persecuted. But the judge wasn't moved. Ms. Parker, the judge said firmly, this lawsuit is without merit. It is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, given the frivolous nature of these claims and the documented pattern of harassment, the court is awarding Mr. Thompson attorney's fees and costs. It was over. Officially, legally, indisputably over. Karen gasped as though she'd been struck. Her pearl necklace clattered against the table as she sank into her chair, staring at the judge in disbelief. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. But it was done. Outside the courthouse, neighbors who had come to watch clapped me on the back, shaking their heads in disbelief. "She's finally finished," one of them said. "She can't come back from this." And for once, I believed it. The fallout was immediate. Karen retreated into her house like a wounded general after a lost war. The blinds stayed closed, the Lexus disappeared from the driveway, the clipboard never reappeared. Rumors swirled that she'd been pressured to sell, that her own family had cut her off after the embarrassment of the lawsuit. Within 3 months, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. When the moving truck arrived, the neighborhood gathered quietly, watching as Karen's empire was dismantled box by box. She didn't wave. She didn't make eye contact. She just climbed into her Lexus, scratches still faintly visible along the side, and drove away without looking back. As the truck pulled out, someone started clapping. Then another joined. Soon the entire street was applauding, not in cruelty, but in catharsis. We weren't celebrating her misery. We were celebrating our freedom. I stood on my porch, coffee mug in hand, the same way I had that very first morning when she claimed my driveway as her own. But now the driveway was empty, pristine, mine again. And this time, it wasn't just concrete. It was a symbol. Proof that bullies, no matter how loud, no matter how cunning, could be beaten with patience, evidence, and the long game. As the applause faded and the neighborhood returned to normal, I allowed myself a quiet smile. Karen had tried to claim my driveway. In the end, she lost her entire street. And I had front row seats to every second of her downfall.